Every one of my records means something. The label, the producer, the year it was made.
Make sure you have the record player on at night.
Bad luck streak and dance in school, down on my knees in pain. Bad luck streak and dance in school.
All right, well, welcome to the Record Night Podcast. I'm Collin. Thanks for tuning in. So, unlike the usual podcast I do with Jake and Joe, where we listen to a record and share our thoughts, the following is a conversation that I had recently with Ashley. Now, who's Ashley, you might ask? Well, Ashley is a vinyl collector from Louisville, Kentucky. I became aware of her via her Instagram page, @Ashtastic on Instagram. She's got a fun account. She shares a lot of cool vinyl records, so I knew that we would have some mutual musical interests. Reached out to her about coming on the show, and she was kind enough to do so. So this is the first time Ashley and I had spoke, so this is really kind of just me getting to know her. We talked about how she got into music originally, and then we obviously talked about, vinyl itself, some of the different aspects of the physical media, and much more. So Ashley has over 700 albums on vinyl, which is amazing and awesome. And yeah, we had a fun conversation. I look forward to hopefully talking to her again at some point down the road and maybe getting a little deeper on some of these topics. But we had a fun conversation nonetheless. And I hope you enjoy. So if you're interested in coming on the podcast, if you collect vinyl, or perhaps you're a musician or just a music aficionado and you'd be interested in coming on the show, I'd love to talk to you. So you can reach out to the podcast a couple of different ways. You can send a direct message to us on Instagram. We're at Record Night Podcast. Or you can send an email to the show. That would be recordnightpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for tuning in. This is Record Night Podcast number 25 with Ashley. I always enjoy asking people kind of how they got into music to begin with, because it tends to go back so far that you just can't even really remember. So, but what are your recollections about like how you got into music in the first place?
I think I've been into music from a fairly young age. A lot of the music I enjoy now was music that my mother enjoyed listening to. So I just kind of carried that on, I suppose. She listened to a lot of classic rock and things like that. And I just always enjoyed it. And I remember, she would leave cassette tapes just sitting around, and I would just play them in my, I had a Talk Girl. It was a Talk Girl from the Home Alone movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I would play it from that, and I would just listen to them all the time. And I just always kind of really liked music.
What was some of the early stuff that you listened to?
Probably Tom Petty. My mom was really into Aerosmith. She liked Leonard Skinner, which that one didn't quite transfer over to me.
Okay.
But Southern rock was her genre, and it wasn't until I got older that I discovered other genres like Rod Stewart, for example. I love Rod Stewart. Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, things like that.
Yeah. So those are some of the artists you got into. Like, does it? Is there anything you're not? I mean, like, how has it expanded for you? Like, what? Like, are you into like rap, hip hop, anything like that, or no?
I'm not too much into rap and hip hop. I do like some older genres like Tupac. Very poetic.
Yeah,
almost.
sure.
So I very much like Tupac. As for recently, I like The Weeknd, Run DMC, things like that. But I'm not too much into current hip hop or things like that. Just never got into it. But I think it just evolved into started reading about I remember when internet became big and Wikipedia became a big thing. I'd look up the Rolling Stones, and then I would read about Keith Richards, or I'd read about John Lennon, my favorite Beatle, and then I'm like, oh, and I learned about Yoko Ono, and it just it all kind of connected. All these bands were influenced by someone, and John Lennon was influenced by Buddy Holly, so I started listening to Buddy Holly, which I love Buddy Holly now, and I would read about these artists who were influenced by people, and I'd go check them out.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm talking with Ashley, by the way, if I didn't mention that. You're probably better known at Ashtastic on Instagram. You've got a fun account. So how did that start? How did you start collecting vinyl and everything like that?
I started collecting vinyl in 2013, And basically, I wanted a way to collect music, just in general. It's really hard with the streaming apps these days, and kind of the shuffle generation, to actually
Mm.
collect an album. So I really liked artwork on album covers, because I would see
Mm.
albums places and wouldn't even know the band, but I would love that album artwork on it, and I'd want to purchase it. So I
Mm.
bought I got a Crosley record player as a gift. I still have it. And my first album was REO Speedwagon High Fidelity.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And then I just kind of grew and grew. And I think now I'm up to about like 720 albums or something like that
On vinyl?
on vinyl.
Oh
Yeah.
my God, that's amazing. Wow, that's so cool. I feel like
Yeah.
I've got like 60 or 70, and I feel like that's a lot. Man, that's crazy. That's so awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually have to keep them on a Google spreadsheet so I don't buy the same ones again.
Oh, wow. Wow. Where do you keep all those?
I just keep them on my shelf. I went to Walmart and I bought like 2 sets of those cubes that you are meant to
Okay.
put collapsible fabric drawers in, and
Yeah.
I just put them in there. And so far, it's held up. Moving is always quite the pain, because
Mm.
730 albums weigh quite a bit.
Oh
So,
God, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So anytime I move, the albums are more of a cumbersome than actual furniture that I own.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. That's interesting. Well, so do you still actively like buy records now? Like, how's the
Oh yeah.
local, like in Louisville, how's the scene down there to buy records and stuff?
The record stores just recently opened due to COVID and everything, and they're very limited on the number of people they let in. So it's not too bad. I've just purchased a lot of things online because it's just easier. I used to love going to the record store before COVID and all this happened, but now it's kind of tricky on who's open and what hours are they open, and things like that. So mainly I've been sticking to online, and
Hmm.
I subscribe to the Vinyl Me Please subscription, so I get things through there.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
So like you have a ton of records. Do you still stream stuff
Oh
anyway,
yeah.
or yeah? Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
definitely. Yeah, I have a Spotify premium account. I
Okay.
stream I stream stuff all the time, because to me, buying an album is more of like just owning it, and Spotify is almost disposable. It's a lot, obviously it's a lot easier. So if I own an album, that typically means I really like it, because you're not gonna pay $25-$30 for an entire album that you're just mediocre about.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, I feel the same way. I have a record player, I have all these records, but I stream more than anything, just because I don't want to wear out the records
Right.
themselves and everything like that. So,
Exactly.
um, yeah. So, you mentioned to me, we messaged a little bit before this. I asked you like, what are some albums you're into now, and you mentioned the 1975, their new record, Notes of a Conditional Form, or Notes on a Conditional Form.
Yeah, Notes on a Conditional Form, definitely.
Are you fans of the 1975 just generally, or did you just jump on like with this new record?
Just in general, but this album was really exciting. It's an extremely long album, and I actually ended up purchasing it twice. I have one that's in like a neon green vinyl, and then one is like a picture disc.
Okay.
Because one came signed, or a postcard that came signed. But I just really, I feel like they've expanded on this, and also I think it's been in the work for a couple years. But I think they did a really good job on this album.
I didn't make it all the way through. I listened to it a little bit, but like you said, it is a long album.
Yeah.
It seemed like they were. I definitely enjoyed it, but it seemed like they were throwing a lot at you as far as like different genre
Yeah.
stuff like that. Is that typical for them to do that, or was it more like experimental?
It's pretty typical of them, and I also
Okay.
think that they're trying to reinvent themselves a little bit. A lot of people say that the 1975 is like the reemergence of like emo music,
Mm.
which I don't know if I get that quite vibe from them. They're not quite the My Chemical Romance quite there, but they're like a dark pop almost.
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of the songs you hear that are like really poppy, and synthesized, they actually have pretty dark lyrics to them. It's
Hmm.
almost reminds me of the Smiths a little bit. Like the song might be
Oh, okay.
lighthearted, but the lyrics are kind of heavy.
Yeah, yeah. I tend to like that kind of like
Yeah,
masking, if you will, like in music.
right. Like Foster the People, Pumped Up Kicks. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't
Great
realize that
example.
song's about, a school shooting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen kind of comes to mind
Right.
for me as one that kind of got misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned a few like Rod Stewart, like what are some of your favorite? Like, do you have like a favorite artist, or is it too difficult to pick just one?
It's pretty difficult. Some of my favorite artists, I don't have too many new artists or bands that I adapt as much as I did as stuff growing up.
Hmm.
So, like Lana Del Rey comes to mind, for
Okay.
example. I really love her stuff. Red Hot Chili Peppers is probably one of my top three bands.
Okay. Sure.
Velvet Underground, definitely is up there. 1975, obviously. And just your basics like the Beatles and Rolling Stones and things like that. Like I said, I don't typically branch out too much and adapt into a new music that I just love, but a few will come along, and I would say like 1975 and Lana Del Rey has really done that for me.
Nice. As far as like getting into different music and stuff, like do you have like do you sit down to listen to it, or is it just kind of like in the car? Like how do you like introduce yourself to different music and that sort of thing?
It's probably something I should become better at, but I've started listening to whole albums
Mm,
instead of just listening to one or two songs. And also, Spotify has a really good algorithm where you can type in the name of a song and it'll tell you like this song is related or this playlist is related to this song, and it kind of lets you go from there and you can kind of skip around. But I typically find a lot of my stuff from Spotify.
yeah, same here. That's what I was going to bring up before. That's one of the like vinyl has benefits, whether it's artwork or whatever, just the more
Mhm.
physical aspect of it, but
Right.
it also has limitations. And one of the
Right.
things is like you can't I mean, you could pick up the
Right.
needle and move it, but like you can't really skip around. So one of the
Right.
things I've really come to enjoy is like the art of the album, listening to the entire piece.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
do you there are albums that are, you know, more or less just a collection of songs, and there's really heavy like concept stuff, probably on the level that like the 1975, this new album they came out with. Do you have like do you have a strong preference between like a more concept type of record versus just a collection of tunes?
It really depends on what I'm doing. If I know I'm going to sitting down and I'm working on a project or I'm doing something, then I might put on something like Dark Side of the Moon or
Mm,
Notes on Conditional Form that has those super long tracks that maybe there's filler tracks in between that you wouldn't necessarily listen to unless you're listening to an entire album. Um, but if I'm hosting or having friends or something, then I'll probably choose something like a greatest hits album maybe
mm,
of some. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I tend to. Do you have a lot of greatest hits like albums?
Not too many because I tend to shy away because I'm somewhat of a completionist. I want to like
Mm,
collect that album, so while it
yeah.
might be tempting, if I find a good deal on something or a super cool album like greatest hits like the Eagles, like I have that, but I also want to own individual albums too.
Yeah. I have the same thing, kind of shying away from best of. There's some
Right.
like older artists you have to get a best of, like if
Right.
like Sam Cooke or something like that. They only
Definitely. Yeah.
released them on like the little records anyway. So
On the 45. Yeah.
yeah. Um, do you listen to record, like is it mostly like by yourself, or do you listen to records a lot in a social context? Because starting the podcast was kind of a new thing for me to like. I'm gonna have friends over and we're gonna play a record.
Right. I typically listen to them by myself. I don't listen to them too much with friends because if you're hanging out with friends and you're typically doing something, if you have to get up to constantly flip an album
Hmm.
or change an album, and for example, I have every single one of my records is in a plastic sleeve. So in order to listen to an album, I have to go find it on the shelf of 730 something albums. and then pull it out, remove the plastic sleeve, take it out of the paper sleeve, then take it out of the inner paper sleeve, place it on the album, and then to flip it and to change albums, you have to put it back. And it's kind of a lot. So if you have like a really long album and you're just going to kind of chill out and listen, and like you said, drink like with your friends, but if you're in an upbeat setting, then I probably would just go to streaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned before, let me get into kind of like the actual vinyl side of it. Like you mentioned before, you first had a Crosley. Was it just a record player, or was it like one of those 5-in-1 like CD tape cassette? Because that's the first one I had, was a 5-in-1.
It's just your regular Crosley that you would get at like a Barnes and Noble or something. This little pink suitcase type one.
Yep.
Yeah, and I still have it for nostalgic reasons. I'm not sure I'll ever get rid of it.
Now, yeah, as far as like you said, you enjoyed like the artwork and stuff like that. Is that more like why you collect vinyl, or are you like an audiophile? How do you take care of your records meticulously? Anything like that?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an audiophile by any means.
Okay.
I don't have $3,000 speakers, because I personally believe if you have thousands of dollars in a setup of any kind, it's going to sound amazing. But I am very meticulous about my albums. Like I said, they're all documented, each individual one, all 730 something on Google Sheets. They each have an individual note. So if there's a tear in the right-hand corner or a ring,
wow.
that's all listed. They're all alphabetical. They all have plastic sleeves. And if I buy new albums, they don't go on the shelf until they're logged, because I'll lose track of them. So I'm very meticulous about them. But no, I wouldn't say I'm an audiophile.
Okay. Yeah. So, do you recall like what's your setup look like now? I mean, like do you still have that same record player, or is it do you have something?
I've upgraded to an Audio Technica.
Okay.
So I mean, it's nothing major, but it's definitely an upgrade from the Crosley. And I have my speakers, I think, are fairly cheap. I think they're like $50 or $60 for the pair, and they're actually I've got them years ago from FYE, and they've worked. Yeah, they've worked well for me in the past. Of course, I've thought about investing in like a high system with like really nice speakers and stuff like that, but I feel like it suits me well, the Audio Technica. I don't have to get too deep into it, and I'd also rather sink that money into buying more albums than to buying a system.
Yeah. One of my buddies, Jake, who does the podcast with me, is like always bugging me about the speakers. And I'm like, well, hey man, if you want to buy them for me, that's fine. But like, I'm good enough with the speakers I have.
Right.
I'd rather just buy more albums. Okay. Go back to, what is Vinyl Me Please? Is that like a record subscription type thing?
Yes. So you sign up and they send you one record a month. And if you don't like that record, you can choose to swap it out with something on their store, like a previous month or something else on their store, or you can just skip that month. And you can also sign up for multiple genres. When I first started it, probably 5 years ago, they only had one. It was one record a month. And now they have like a hip hop genre, they have a classics genre, and then the record of the month. And it's actually gone up in price a little bit, but I do like that you can swap it out. So that's nice. And they have a lot of exclusive pressings so that you can't find them anywhere else that's not them.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, the Wild Feathers are a band that I'm a fan of, and they announced that they're releasing their next record exclusively through Magnolia Record Club, which is like identical. Yeah. It sounds like exactly what you just laid out there. So I'm trying that on a, just like for the month, but yeah, I'm kind of new to that whole record subscription world. Do you often like do you swap the record a lot, or do you skip a lot of months? Like,
I've swapped quite a bit. I don't know if I've ever skipped a month, because there's always something in their library that I'm interested in, and I'll see something and I'll kind of like it, and I'll say, okay, well, next month if I don't like this album, I'm probably gonna swap it out for this one.
Yeah. Is it always the same? Do you always have the same choices of records you could swap with, or do they change that every month as well?
They change typically every month.
Okay. I imagine. Do you have? like records that you still want to get that you have trouble getting your hands on? And if
Oh
so,
yeah, for
how
sure.
big is that list for you?
I used to actually have a list on Google Sheets, but it just got so ridiculously long that I
Okay.
was just like, you know what? It's in my head. If I come across it in the wild, I'm not gonna not get it. Like, oh, I didn't know I wanted that.
Right, right.
But yeah, there's some like Buddy Holly, That'll Be the Day. That's the
Mm.
next big album I'm probably gonna buy. Let's see. I wouldn't mind getting my hands on an original Etta James at last.
Ooh.
So a lot of the classic things like that. I know that 90s vinyl is super rare,
Yeah.
but it's not my main consumption.
Mm.
So if I had the choice of spending hundreds of dollars on an album, I'm probably gonna choose one from the 50s or the 60s versus like 98.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like they're eventually getting around to just repressing the
Yeah,
albums, so like they'll eventually be there.
right.
Um, how do you have an idea of how many of your records are like original pressings versus repressings or newer records?
I would say about 60 to 70% are original.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of them are so difficult to find, or they are albums that are not just something I'm just in love with that I will settle for a repressing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, for example, Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill.
Mm.
I think, the original of that's it's if you can find it, it's gonna be hundreds of dollars. So I think I just bought a reissue of it that's clear vinyl, which is good enough for me, because like I said, 90s vinyl is not my niche market.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely found it frustrating. Like, do you have any artists that like, do you have like a complete collections for
Yeah, definitely.
artists? Okay. And I mean, so what are some of those?
I have all the Black Keys albums. I have
Nice.
every Beatles album. Let me see. I think I almost have, or I may have, all of the Led Zeppelin albums.
Okay.
I think actually I'm lacking Coda, so I can't say that.
Okay.
Yeah, but other than that, let me see. I think that's just about it. I've got a few soundtrack albums, but no, nothing that's complete fully. No, besides
Okay.
the Black Keys and the Beatles, and yeah.
Yeah, well, my probably my favorite artist is Warren Zevon, and he
Okay.
made records, from the '60s all the way up to when he died in 2003, and so
Yeah.
like I've got them all, but like he just hit a
Oh
dead
wow.
spot in the '90s where they literally
Oh
didn't press them on
man.
vinyl.
Right. They don't even
Um,
exist.
yeah, right, right. So when it comes to like original pressings, old vinyl, like that are, do you have a lot that are like beat to shit and like
Oh yeah.
do you enjoy the crackle? Is that cool for you? Or would you rather have a cleaner sound?
If I come across an album that's original and it is, pretty beat up, and if it's at a fair price, I'll pick it up most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll just note it in the notes, and I'll put what's wrong with it, replace if you come across it. But
I see.
if it's cheap enough and I think it'll play, then I'll definitely pick it up. I have a Bob Dylan album that's like that, and there's only like one song it skips on. The thing about the vinyl that was pressed back then, it was made so much better than the
Mm,
vinyl that's pressed today, the 180 gram that you see today. So it was meant to be tossed around on the floor, and it can take a beating and then still play. But records today, I've bought brand new albums that are sealed, that are warped or scratched just
mm.
because of how they were shipped in a box.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that a lot, like with some artists. Like vinyl has made enough of a comeback where everybody's kind of putting their records on vinyl now, and it
Right.
seems
They
like
I saw vinyl at Cracker Barrel the other day.
wow.
Yeah.
What was it?
It was I think Metallica and Led Zeppelin. Of course they had the Toby Keith from Shania Twain.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, I was just dumbfounded that it made its way into Cracker Barrel. It's so,
Yeah.
large at this point.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine who works at Walmart, and he was saying like they basically got rid of. I mean, I'm sure they still have some CDs, but they basically got rid of their CDs and replaced it with vinyl.
Yeah.
But with it making a comeback like that, I feel like some artists, I'll get some vinyl, and it's one thing if the records or if the artist is independent and they just
Mhm.
don't have a lot of money to put into it, and it's like
Right.
very simple. But like I picked up like one of Kanye West's newer albums, and it seemed like they were just
Yeah.
like, hey, vinyl's a thing, put it on vinyl and send it out. Like there was not a lot to it, so
Right. Yeah, and
um
also a lot of marketing companies and record companies want to profit off of that. Like I know Taylor Swift's album that came out not too long ago. I don't own it, by the way, but she sent out the same album and it had 10 different pressings. And I think they
yeah.
were different colors and things like that. And, people I saw on Instagram were talking about, oh, is everyone the Taylor Swift fans, are they going to try to get all 10 albums? It was the same album, but it was just like a different
Yeah.
design or pressing. And it gets to a point where it's kind of like a money grab.
Mhm. Yeah. My sister bought that record, not all 10 of them or whatever, but just one
Right.
of them. And so, yeah, I'm aware of that whole thing, but she ordered it, and it was like, the response she got was like, all right, your vinyl will be there in 16 weeks. And I'm like,
Oh, wow.
16 weeks? Like, what? Just let me know when it's actually ready. I gotta know
Right.
that,
Right.
it's gonna be here in 4 months. Yeah, like, do you have like, do you have a preference about that? Like with the more produced, like, well, let me specifically what I'm going for is like lyrics. Like, do you prefer to have lyrics with records, or does that not really matter to you?
Meaning like lyrics on on the inner spreadsheet or
Yeah, like included in like kind of the production of the vinyl.
I mean that would be neat to include it, but it's not something that I look for. If I had a choice between the two albums, I would choose the one with lyrics, but it's not something that I have to have.
I see. Um, just on a side note, real quick, do you play music at all, or have you ever been interested in playing music?
No, I think that's partially why I'm so into music,
Mhm.
because I'm not someone who is musically inclined. So I appreciate it very much when someone else is.
Yeah. Yeah, same here, pretty much. I mean, I've messed around. Like, I can kind of, I have a guitar, and I could like
Yeah,
strum a couple chords, but it's like I can't actually
right.
play it.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
think I've played an instrument since recorder in like fifth grade.
oh wow.
Yeah.
Um, so what about, and this is another thing that's been interrupted by COVID, but like live shows. Do you go to a lot of live shows, or
No,
have
I
you?
used to all the time. For my birthday this year, I actually had tickets to see James Taylor on my actual birthday, and Jackson Brown was opening for them. And
Wow.
yeah, that got pushed back for a year. So literally, like 12 months from my birthday. So yeah,
Mm,
next June I'll get to see them hopefully. But yeah, I used to go to all kinds of shows, and even there's a place here in Louisville called the Mercury Ballroom, and they do cover bands like all the time, and they're really great cover bands. Like they legit look and sound like the Rolling Stones.
mm-hmm.
So
Nice.
it's pretty fun. I loved going to those, and it's fairly cheap to go to, and it's just something to do on a Friday or Saturday night. But I really really miss live music.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Same here. You mentioned James Taylor. Said Jackson Brown
Mhm.
was opening. What about? Do you have any Jackson Brown records?
I do not actually.
Oh wow. I
I
see.
don't have any Jackson Brown.
Are you a fan of him at all, or like not so much?
I am.
Okay.
I am. I just haven't come across much of his stuff in the wild.
Hmm.
So I think in order for me to collect his, I would have to seek it out. And I'm always seeking out other things that it just has never come up. And when that concert rolled around, I was actually looking at a few albums of his just to have since I was going to see him. And then COVID happened and I kind of lost track of it.
Yeah. Um, what about like features on the record? You said you have Led Zeppelin albums, and like I know, uh, I forget which record. I think it might be Led Zeppelin 3 has like it's like a kaleidoscope kind of cover where you can like spin and the
Yeah.
images change on the front. Do you have any cool albums like that have been kind of weird?
Yeah. I've got Sticky Fingers with the zipper on the front, the album. And I've also got the Weekend album that has comes with like 3D glasses and things like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Are you there? I think you cut out a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here now.
And So yeah, I can't think of anything else I really have. I have, um, let me see. I don't know. I can't. I know. I have some albums that have some neat things on them, but those are the only two that really come to mind so far. And by the way, the Sticky Fingers album, I wanted it so bad, and I went to a record show and I finally got it. And it's been the bane of my existence to store it because it has that metal zipper on the front, so you can't put anything in front of it because it's going to damage it. So it's by its lonesome self on a shelf because I can't have anything pressed against it. So yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that probably wasn't not a
Yeah, I didn't
consideration
think
when
about
doing
that.
something like that. Yeah.
Right. Until I bought it. And then I was like, oh, that's a problem.
Yeah. So going back to live shows, like, are there is there an artist that is like not around that you wish you could have seen? Because I know I have a few of those for sure.
Oh yeah. Obviously with 1975. I'm not even sure they've ever came to my city of Louisville, but I hope that they do, or at least somewhat close, because I'm somewhat close to Chicago and Nashville and things like that.
Okay.
But Stevie Nicks came to our town, and Phil Collins also came, and
Oh.
or they were both canceled. So those would have been good shows to try to get tickets to. So yeah, I'm hoping that they'll come back around.
Yeah, dude, like, so for me, like, I'm up in Cleveland, and so it seemed like unfortunately, we don't really have the best kind of live. I mean, people come here, like, if it's a huge artist, they'll come to an arena or whatever, but like,
You guys have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, don't you?
we do, yeah.
Yeah.
But as far as like the live venues, it just seems like they're more likely to hit Columbus, Ohio, which is like 2 hours
Yeah.
south, or Pittsburgh, for example. So like,
Right.
it's like if an artist comes to Pittsburgh, Columbus, or like even Detroit, I'll go see them there. Do
Right.
artists tend to hit Louisville, or do you have a similar kind of like, oh, if they go there, I'll go see them?
Yeah, it's kind of a similar thing. There are not too many people. Louisville is the biggest city in Kentucky, but it's not the capital or anything. The capital is a very small town. But yeah, a lot of them will hit Nashville, and Nashville is only like 2.5 hours away, so it's not too bad. And when you have the choice between Nashville and Louisville, Kentucky, their artists are probably going to go to Nashville.
Yeah, right, sure. What about, like, I don't know if you mentioned country music, just geographically where you're located. Is that more of a thing? Like, were you ever
Oh
into
yeah.
country music? What are some of the artists that you're into in that genre?
I grew up listening to what I like to call the golden age of like the country music, the 90s.
Mm.
And I don't listen to it too much now, but growing up, I listened to a lot of Tracy Lawrence, Gary Allen, Kenny Chesney, things like that. Now, there's very select few artists that I like that are country, and Dierks Bentley is one of my favorite ones. I love Dierks Bentley. There's also a new group, or I guess it's not really new. It's called Midland, and it sounds pretty good. It reminds me of the 90s, gives me the 90s vibe. But yeah, I don't really get into too much country now.
Is that just random, or because you don't like the direction it's gone? Like, talk about that a little bit.
I don't really like the direction it's gone. I feel like they've kind of transformed it to pop.
Yep.
And country used to be very bluesy, twangy, it had its own genre. And now some of the songs you hear, you can't really distinguish where the pop and country begins. And I kind of attribute that to like the Taylor Swift kind of thing, because she started out really country and now she's super, super pop. So that's kind of when I started gearing towards or away from country.
Yeah, I was never. We talked about it on one of the podcasts we did
Mhm.
recently. About country music, how there's a lot of people that like really hate country, and I think hip hop is
Yeah.
like a similar genre. Like, you'll get people that like
Right.
viscerally do not want to listen to hip hop, and
Right.
jazz is, I guess, another genre. Well, let me touch on that. Are you into jazz at all, real quick?
I like Hank Mobley, but that's really
Okay.
about it. Yeah.
Now, I don't. No, I'm not familiar with Hank Mobley. Is that like is he a more contemporary artist, or?
Somewhat. He was big in around the 40s and 50s.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So yeah, it's I don't really know too much about jazz, but I do know that I enjoy his stuff. I feel like the jazz genre can be very broad. There's so many different types of jazz I didn't even know
Hmm.
existed, you know? So yeah, I haven't really gotten too much into it though.
Yeah. Um, yeah, going back to country real quick, like I was saying, I was never really into it to begin with, and then like when I got introduced to some older like Waylon Sturgill Simpson is kind of the guy that like got me into country music in the first place, and
Yeah.
then Tyler Childers, and then I started going back to some of the older stuff like Waylon
Tyler
Jennings.
Childers is nice. He sounds a lot like Johnny Cash.
Yeah, yeah. What about Are you familiar with Coulter Wall?
No.
Oh, dude, listen,
Okay.
Coulter Wall sounds just, it's like, wait a minute, is that Johnny Cash? It's like,
Right.
and he's like 25 years old, so it's kind of shocking
Right.
to hear that voice come
Yeah.
out of him. Um, but yeah, anyway, like with the way country has progressed, like especially since I'm not a fan of it, like I forget what song it was. Something about the back seats of the Cadillac. Um, I don't know. It was one of these new country songs that came out recently, and
Yeah.
I was like, this is country? Like it sounded
I think
kind of
that's
like,
a Florida Georgia line uh
okay,
uh song. Yeah.
it could be a lot of country songs. I feel like that's, I don't know.
Right.
They're
That's true.
stereotyped for having the exact same sort of stuff in their
Right, that's
music.
true.
But then Old Town Road came out, and I was like, all right, well, good for
Oh
that guy that
gosh.
he just finally went ahead and the genres
Yeah.
are close to each other anyway, so he just finally went ahead and did it.
Right.
Um,
I feel like the Old Town Road, there were two groups of people. There was the people who liked it ironically, like the same way that you like the Macarena.
sure.
And then there were people who were like really genuinely liked it. And I don't think that they know that there's those two groups exist.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Um, Now, as I've gotten older and like listen to more music, I've become like less critical of me. Like I think
Yeah.
when I was younger, I used to be very judgmental and like, oh,
Right.
this album is trash or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas like now that I'm older, I kind of have a hard. I mean, there's definitely stuff I don't like. I basically just arrive at that conclusion. Well, this is not for me, is basically. But
Right.
do you have albums that you like really don't like, or like how is that for you?
I do have some albums that I'm not the biggest fan of. So, and one of the most controversial, I think, that everyone is just odd that I'm not really into is Smashing Pumpkins.
Okay.
Because everyone loves Smashing Pumpkins. I think they're a really great band. I think they do have good music, but it's just never hit me the same way, like, Alice in Chains or Bush or like some of those types of bands like Incubus hit me. I just
Mm.
never was the Smashing Pumpkins huge fanatic that most people seem to be. And that's the one band everyone's like, I can't believe you don't like them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that kind of reminds me of another thing because that came up recently. I was talking to somebody who are you familiar with Tool? Do you like Tool?
Yeah, Maynard,
Okay.
yeah.
So we listened to Tool on the podcast one time, and it just blew us all away. Like I wasn't really familiar with them, and I thought this is amazing. But then there's some people you
Right.
talk to, and they're just not into it. Um, do you tend to like records or songs like right away, or are there records that you had to listen to it 10 times before like it clicked for you or that sort of thing?
There are some records that it took me a minute. Like for example, you mentioned Kanye West earlier. I'm not the biggest fan of his newest stuff, but looking back on some of his albums, like Graduation or like College Dropout, I think is what it was, or something
Hmm.
like that. But those are really great albums. And at the time when they were coming out, I was like, oh, hip hop's not really my thing. And now that like I hear them, I'm like, man, that was a really well done album.
Hmm.
Kind of like what happened to Kanye. And maybe it took the new Kanye to like see how good he was in the past.
Yeah, yeah, to have that contrast, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, I've talked about that with hip hop before. I wasn't into it, and I just feel bad because like I remember like I'm 28 years old, so like
Mhm.
I into Club by 50 Cent. is like
Oh
a
yeah.
popular song I can remember. And so, there's just nothing there. And so
Right.
that led me to believe, well, there's nothing of value in that genre. I'm not going near it. And then it wasn't until later
Right.
that I found all this like, oh, there's actually like poetry, kind of like you were talking about with Tupac or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Are there many genres you've gotten into later, or has it just been a kind of gradual process the whole way along?
I would say hip hop has been one of them, and I feel like I'm always like a decade behind hip hop,
Okay.
because I remember back in like 2010 when I discovered like Lupe Fiasco, like or he does that kick push song, and I was like, who is this? And listening to him, I was like, he's been out forever. I'm like, whoa, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm always behind the times with hip hop. Like I'm always like a decade too late. So I'm curious of the things that are coming out now that in like 8 years, I'm gonna be like, have you heard this? Like, yeah, I heard that like 8 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Before you mentioned Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, you're into
Mhm.
those. Well, now we listened to Black Sabbath recently, and one of the things we talked about, well, and Led Zeppelin too, and like they're arguably like considered metal, like the first metal bands.
Yeah.
Um, are you into metal at all, or like what do you think of them being characterized that way?
Well, when you say metal, I think metal now and metal then have different definitions. So
Okay,
metal in 1980 was much different than metal now. Metal now is almost what I would consider screamo.
sure.
So I'm not too into that. No, but back I like classic metal, I guess you could say.
Okay. Yeah, that's how it's developed for me too. Like we listened to Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, their self-titled debut
Hmm.
recently,
Hmm.
and I was like, this is metal, this is awesome. This is just like blues rock. I can listen to this all
Right,
day, or like Led Zeppelin or whatever. But yeah, I tend to
right.
be kind of turned off by the heavier the,
It's
the
almost like you're
the newer
trying
metal.
too hard. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and well, one of the things we talked about in regards to Black Sabbath is like, well, like, for the time that music was more aggressive,
for sure.
compared to everything else. And so like music today has just kind of drifted more aggressive. So now metal has to be,
Right. Yeah.
that kind of vocal. And
Right. And back then, I think of a lot of the heavy metal of it was the personification of like Ozzy and like Alice Cooper. Like their music to me wasn't really that hard, but when you look at their shows and how they look, like people boycotted Alice Cooper and Ozzy and things like that because he was dark and it was devil worship, and I think it's kind of like the only thing I can compare that to, and I'm not even sure if it's happened in my lifetime since, is when Eminem became a big thing
mm,
and everyone wanted to boycott Eminem for his lyrics, and but nowadays it's really hard to do much shocking things, but in
yeah.
1976 it wasn't too hard to shock the world.
Right, right. Yeah, that's probably I think that's probably you mentioned cassettes earlier, and I
Yeah,
think The Real Slim Shady by Eminem is that's the first piece of music I can remember like owning. Like I had it on
yeah.
on cassette tape, and then I also
Oh wow.
had Smash Mouth, Astro Lounge.
Yeah,
CD.
definitely.
That's probably like my first CD. You mentioned it before, but I forget. Do you remember you said your first vinyl record? Do you remember what that is or was?
REO Speedwagon.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
yeah.
Are you fans of them, or is that just like a
Oh
random?
yeah, definitely. I love REO Speedwagon.
Yeah.
I actually got to see them for like 5 minutes in a concert once. It was at a state fair, ironically, and it was storming really bad. And they played "Keep on Loving You," and then it started storming, and that was it. So I technically have seen REO Speedwagon, but
Oh
yeah.
man, bummer. So like, what are the do you have like do you have a lot of venues there in Louisville? Like, is that where you saw them?
No, I saw them at a state fair in Illinois a
Oh,
few
okay.
years back. But yeah, there's a lot of venues here. We have ironically or not, the KFC Yum Center.
Okay.
So that's where like the major concerts happen. There's the Mercury Ballroom, and then there's also Louisville Palace. That it's like an old school, like red velvet seated theater, and it's one of the most beautiful places you'd ever be. Like, you walk into it and you're going to see a rock show, but the ceiling is something you would see in like a cathedral. So it's
Sure.
quite nice. But yeah, we have quite a few venues here.
Do you have like a favorite or like one you prefer?
Definitely Louisville Palace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to prefer those kind of settings too.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
like,
intimate.
I guess it depends too on like what kind of concert you're seeing, but what do you have
Mhm.
a preference between like I want to sit down and watch a show versus like I'd rather be standing up like near the stage kind of vibe?
Yeah, so the more I like a band or I'm really into a band, I will spend more money on their tickets to get closer. And
Hmm.
there are some bands that I'm like, oh, it'd be a cool show to see, but I don't want to spend $600 to be by the stage.
Yeah.
Um, right. So like I saw Pink in concert a couple years ago. My friends wanted to go, and I was like, yeah, I'll pay like $80 for a ticket. And we were kind of in the nosebleeds, but Pink is not someone that I just had to see. But I saw Red Hot Chili Peppers here in Louisville, and I was like 6 or 7 rows back from the stage, and I really went out. We went out for those tickets, So it really just depends on the artist, how much money and effort I want to put into it.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think like Bruce Springsteen is a guy that I've seen that I've paid a lot of money to go see.
Hmm.
When you go to a smaller venue and you pay $10 to see an artist, it just
Right.
for me it became hard to then shell out 60, 70 bucks,
Right,
whatever it is to see
right.
somebody else.
Crazy. Yeah.
Um, so when it comes to like albums, like do you have certain things like as far as production or like elements that you like or dislike as far as like production of albums are concerned?
I'm pretty in love with colored vinyl. Like,
Okay.
absolutely. I just love colored vinyl. And I have I think the James Taylor album, I have three copies of it. One's like an original, one was blue that was put out by Barnes and Noble, like an exclusive, and then
Mm.
one's white, I believe. And I just keep buying it because it's colored vinyl, and I just love colored vinyl. Picture disc, I love picture disc. And the only thing about picture disc I don't like is that they put them in like the cheap plastic sleeves,
Mm.
and they're not in like a really nice cardboard like cover. But I don't get too much into pressing numbers. I'm not into it has to be an import from Japan or something like
Mm.
that. As long as I enjoy it, I like to keep it original if I can. And if they have it in colored vinyl, I'll probably pick it up.
So like obviously like you've got a lot of records, you're collecting them. Do you just envision, do you have like do you think in the future about what you're going to do with them or what you're going to like where you're going to leave them, or is it that's too far like in the future?
No, I think about that. I've thought about that a lot, actually. I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, oh, like if I have kids someday, they're going to be like, what are we going to do with all these? Because I mean, albums are old now. So when I have children to that point, they're going to be ancient. They're like, what do we do with these?
Yeah.
And, I'd like to think that they would, if they don't want them, that they will sell them if the market's still there for them, however
I
many
hope
years from
so.
now. And then, right. And then maybe someone will buy them that will really love and appreciate them. They can just kind of keep getting passed around and carried on to someone who really likes them.
Hmm. Um, yeah. So I forget what else I wanted to ask you. Are there I- you talked we talked a little bit about like the local record scene down there. Do you have like, is it mostly just you? Do you have friends that collect records or anything like that?
I don't have too many friends that collect records. No. I've made a lot of friends on Instagram and things like that,
Yeah.
but but no, not in person. Typically, no. Mm-mm.
One of the things I like about I tend to like older records, and one of the things we've talked about a lot is like I tend to like shorter records, and those the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
'Cause I think back in the day, they were limited to the vinyl,
Right.
whereas like a lot of the repressings of newer stuff, like, well, they weren't limited at all, so it ends up being a
Right.
triple LP. Um,
Right.
do you have a preference that or between those two, or do you have a lot of double, triple LPs?
I have quite a few double LPs, but I feel like in the 50s and the 60s, like the Sam Cooke era that you mentioned earlier, there were songs that were like 2.5, maybe 3 minutes long. And then when you start getting into like the hard rock of the 70s, that's when songs like Freebird's coming out. And it's like 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
And they kind of set the precedent for having these like long albums. And their only option was to have 3 albums on side A, or I'm sorry, 3 songs on side A, or having a double LP. So I don't really have a preference. If I get a double LP, typically they're more expensive. So they're going to have to be a band that I just really, really like to invest that kind of money into.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned before buying records like just strictly for the artwork. Did you do that a
Right.
lot? Like with, or have you gotten into bands as a result of that, or no? It's just cool to have the cool artwork for the
I've bought albums strictly for the artwork, and there's some I've never listened to.
Okay.
And I know, like, I probably should. There was a record that I bought a couple years ago, and it was like called Snack Attack, and it had this hamburger on the front with these eyes, and I was like, I have to have this album. And
Yeah.
I've never listened to it before, ever. Yeah. So I've definitely, I don't do it too often. It has to be something just completely out there, but I've bought stuff just for the album artwork, definitely.
I've wanted to. I've just never had the guts to actually pull the trigger on that. Even if
Right.
it's just like at a bookstore or something. And it's like, well, it's only
Right.
$3. I mean, just go ahead and get
Right.
it. But I don't know. There's usually something else I could find that I'm like, oh, okay, well, I
Right.
want this, and I end up
Exactly.
putting
Yeah.
that one back.
Right.
Um, yeah. So, as far as the like the artwork is concerned, um, sorry, there was there was an album specifically I was thinking about. Um, do you have like I asked you about favorite artists before,
Mhm.
but do you have a record that just kind of stands out like as your favorite for one reason or another?
Probably definitely my Velvet Underground self-titled album with the Andy Warhol banana, peelable banana on the front.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Because I have an original one of those, and it was my first expensive, super expensive album that I bought. And I bought it. There's a nice frame that it's in, and it's probably one of my most cherished possessions. But it's funny because I always thought like, oh, that's like the most expensive album I'll ever own. And ironically, I picked up an Across the Universe Record Store Day album like in 2014, just because I like the Beatles a lot and I like that movie, and I never got around to opening it.
Oh, wow.
So years later, like in 2017, I was like looking online, just some Record Store Day things on eBay, and I came across it, and it was more expensive than that one, and I was like, maybe it's just one-off listing, and no, it actually surpassed that Velvet Underground album, which
Oh, wow.
is weird because it just goes to show you never know what's going to be quote rare or become valuable.
Mm. Now, you mentioned you're not as into like you don't get into newer artists as often or whatever. Like,
Right.
do you since you're collecting them and stuff, do you kind of have an eye for like, oh man, I think this artist is gonna blow up. I'm gonna get my hands on this vinyl and this is gonna be worth something
Definitely.
in a few years. Okay.
Definitely. I think Leon Bridges is definitely going to go places. Most definitely. I think that basically he is the reincarnation of Sam Cooke, and I'm a huge Sam Cooke fan. I'll never forget the first time I heard him on the radio. I thought, is this a Sam Cooke song I haven't heard? And
Mm.
then they said it was Leon Bridges, and I was like, oh wow. So yeah, I definitely will come across some things that I'll pick up that I'm like, that's definitely going to go somewhere.
Yeah. Now Leon Bridges I've heard of Leon Bridges before. So I mean, like, what are some songs? Like, does he have popular songs that I'd be aware of? Like, I'm trying to think.
He has a song called Texas Sun that came out somewhat recently.
Okay.
Yesterday, was an album of his. But if you like Sam Cooke, you definitely will enjoy him.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so as far as like getting into new music is concerned, a lot of times I find it daunting. There's so much music out there, especially with Spotify and stuff. Like I realize there's probably like albums that I would think are the greatest albums or whatever that I've just never heard before. Like,
Right.
do you experience that? Do you have a lot of people like, oh, you got to listen to this, and
Oh
like,
yeah,
do you find that
definitely.
difficult?
It is somewhat overwhelming, and it almost makes you feel ancient or old, because you'll hang out with somebody or you'll be in a group of people and they'll say, oh my gosh, I love, and they'll say some band name like the Zombie Hillbillies. Their third album was amazing. I'm like, who's the Zombie Hillbillies? You know, and
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a real band. I just made that up, but
It
but
probably is a real band.
right. And then you're like, oh, I have to look these people up. And then you say like, oh, I haven't heard of them. Like, you haven't heard of them? And I'm like, no. No.
Yeah.
I've been listening to, Fleetwood Mac, most of my life, which I forgot to mention them earlier as my number one bands, or probably my number two. I'm a huge Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks fan.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can't believe I left them out earlier. So yeah, it is daunting.
Yeah. Okay, so Fleetwood Mac is interesting. Like, are you into Fleetwood Mac? I mean, you said with Stevie Nicks. Like, are you?
Yeah.
Have you listened to them like prior to Stevie Nicks? Because like they were very different, right?
Right, definitely different. I think it's just nostalgia. So I liked them so much with Stevie Nicks that even when she left, she was the main driving force of what I loved about them. But I still felt a connection to them,
Mm-hmm.
like that kind of thing. It was more of a nostalgia.
Yeah. Okay. Now, how does that go? Like, you like a band. I mean, that's one example. But like, an artist leaves the band. Like, will you typically still be into them? Do you have a lot of examples of that kind of thing happening?
I will give them a chance.
Yeah.
Typically, you don't see too many bands that keep going once the lead singer's gone.
Yeah.
Like, and I could be wrong with this. Like, I know when Rob Thomas left Matchbox 20 to pursue his solo career, I don't think, or I could be wrong, that Matchbox 20 did much without him.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think he came back to the band and things like that. So Matchbox 20 is a band that I grew up with, because I'm 31.
Okay.
So I was like a true 90s kid. Like, Push and 3 a.m. just blared through the radio for like all of the end of the 1990s. Yeah, so definitely. I don't know. I can't think of too many off the top of my head where the main artist has left and came back, but I would definitely give them a shot. And I'm a huge nostalgia person, so if the Cardigans released an album tomorrow, I would be like, well, I gotta listen to it, just because back in the 90s, or they were a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about that real quick? Maybe like bands that you were super into that come out with a record that you're just not feeling, and like you drift away from them. Like, has that happened to you? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like Maroon 5, for example.
Mm.
When they first came out, with that whole album, that was amazing. She Will Be Loved. I thought it was a truly great album. And now I feel they're so manufactured, and they're just putting things out. There's the song Memories, and I was listening to it the other day, and it was like, the memories bring back memories, and I was like, that's just lazy, right? I was like, come on, like, let something rhyme a little bit,
Well, okay. Do you have like favorite like songwriters specifically, just like from a lyrical perspective?
Not typically. I don't study who really writes the songs.
Okay.
I can tell you a couple artists who write their own songs, but I couldn't say like, oh, well, this artist or this person wrote this song for this person and this person. So I mean, as horrible as it sounds, they should probably get more credit than what they do, but I don't really know.
Yeah, well, like, so I just got into singer-songwriters. Like, to me, it's like, and for like some of the older stuff, like they just didn't write their own songs or whatever. But like, Halsey is somebody I'll use as like an example of somebody who's popular, like, and I think she's pretty good. But like, when I see like the song is written by 5 people, I just immediately get turned off, like thinking
Right.
this was written in some boardroom in Nashville with hired writers,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Right.
Um,
Because it feels personal when someone like, when you have a song like Landslide, it's like, oh man, like, what they were going through, and you feel connected to the artist, versus when a song is written by 5 people, it feels very manufactured and fake, and like anyone could have sang it and it would have had the same feeling.
yeah, like they focus grouped the lyrics.
Right.
Like, this is gonna hit
Right.
people, kind of deal. Yeah, I don't
Right.
want to like, and that's I find like trying to discern between that and like I'm not, collaboration is cool. You know what I mean? If there's
Right.
5 people in the band and they all wrote it, that's neat. But like that, it's just a different thing.
Right.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah. All right, so you said the James Taylor show was like rescheduled. Are there any other shows you look forward to going to, like as stuff starts to open up here?
I just want to see any live music, honestly, even if
Yeah.
it's a local band from this city. It would just be so nice to like go somewhere, have a drink, and just like listen to someone play and just have that conversation. Because I found I actually made a really good friend at the last concert I went to. I went to an Incubus concert, and I actually made a really good friend there. And it's funny that you can just talk to strangers in a crowd about, oh, well, this band sounds like this. Oh, that's great. Have you heard these people? Oh, I saw them back in, '09. And you kind of start that rapport up when that doesn't exist anywhere else. That doesn't exist in a grocery store. It's like, oh, you like mac and cheese? I like mac and cheese too.
Yeah.
So it's very personal when you pay money and go to a concert and wait in line and stand in a crowd of people to watch this one band, because typically that means you really like that band, and it's good being around like-minded people who also like that band.
Yeah, for sure. Have you gone to shows by yourself before?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like for a while, like I feel like there's kind of like a stigma. I don't know, like you need to go with somebody, but it's like, well, you're
Right.
gonna meet people, like you said, like that are
Right.
into the band and stuff. So yeah, it's actually kind of cool. Like I've
Yeah.
met people at shows before and stuff,
Yeah.
and well, now I do the podcast with Jake and Joe pretty much, and so I'll make them go to whatever show I want to go to. But like, I think for the longest time, like music was, just personal. Like I might not have anybody else that likes the artist I'm into. So
Right.
um,
Definitely.
yeah, I've gone by myself. But well, Ashley, I think that's all I got for you. I really appreciate you talking to me.
Yeah.
For a little
Been
bit.
fun.
And yeah,
You say you like the wind blowing through your hair. Well, come on, roll with me till the sun goes down. Texas sun.
How about that Record Night podcast?